detailed about like 90-10 and like several other factors. Do something that's a little more flexible, similar to like what other districts have, but also that like kind of sets out our non-negotiables about like equity and teachers being able to be successful with whatever changes we make, those kinds of things. So we have a draft of that our plan is to present that to the board March 13th for information. And then we would present it for action for the board to actually vote on it at the end of March, at the second meeting in March, which is March 27th. And so any of you are welcome to attend. We didn't actually reach out to like invite anyone because you've done a lot of hours in the evening already because you're on this committee, which is awesome. And to come to an extra board meeting is just another night to come do stuff. But if you are interested, just shoot me a note. If you want to just, you don't have to speak, but just come to like be in the crowd. You know, we're going to give a shout out to the committee and stuff when we talk to the board. And
sorry,
yeah.
One that's like more
Either one. I mean, it sometimes depends. Sometimes we present stuff for information and it goes quick and then like all the questions come the second time. And other times like all the questions come at the first time and the second time it's just like a quick vote and there's no questions. So it just depends. And no obligation, just offering it because anyone's always welcome. And then we would also be trying to present some transparent like procedures that go with that policy. So like some of the things we've been talking about, if we come up with a policy that's a little shorter, what does that mean for 90-10? Like, are we making an adjustment like we've talked about here to like 80-20, 100-0, something like that? We'd be clear, like we're not changing our retake policy at this time. Talk about what we want to do with missing assignments, how we want to use zeros in the grade book, just those kinds of procedures that would back up our board policy. So like we would present that to the board, and then we'd be able to be really transparent to like the whole staff about like, here's what the changes are for the fall. And then more than that, like, here's what this committee is going to talk about down the road as we kind of continue to operate. So probably less logistical changes, like that's kind of the first phase. And the second phase would be getting into like more learning, more discussion around, how do we support teachers and like any changes we're making? Like, how do we give people professional development around how to give feedback to kids? Like a proficiency-based environment. How do we give people time to like practice that? Make sure we continue to hear your voices on how do we get kids to value formative work, stay engaged in their learning, those kinds of things. And then how do we communicate that to families and kids too? Basically running the committee as like a means to gather that voice from students and teachers and other leaders in the district. So that's basically where we're at right now. In terms of communication, the things we're talking about don't dramatically change much at middle school, really, in terms of some of the changes we talked about for the fall. We will probably need to start giving a little bit of communication to middle school, just about like heads up, here's kind of what's happening, like not a bunch of major changes. High school, and similarly, K-5 is working on developing proficiency scales and like not a lot of major logistical changes for K-5 either based on the work for the fall. High school is the one where there would be like substantive changes that actually like affect how teachers do things differently. And like we talked about, we basically sent a video that everyone at RHS saw last Wednesday, and BHS is going to do it tomorrow in their departments, where every high school teacher gets a chance to kind of see the work of our committee so far. And basically, it's me kind of voicing it over and just kind of saying, like, don't worry, like, we're not doing a standards-based report card like we have in elementary school and high school, because like we really haven't defined that for people. So people are kind of like, whoa, what is this committee talking about? Like, is it going to be crazy? Trying to basically like, no, that's not what's going on. That's not our purpose. It kind of lays out the work we've done, the timeline, and then sort of like 4 big questions that we're kind of looking at making changes for next year that would impact high school most. How do we want to like handle missing work in the grade book? Like, do we want to just put a 0 in? Do we want to like identify it as missing with like an M, something like that? And there's links in this video for every teacher to kind of click and give their feedback. And after BHS does it, we'll bring all that feedback actually to the committee to review all the high school teachers' voice. How how do we want to handle like zero in general? Like what should be the minimum score? Do we want to like do something that like raises the minimum score like we have in middle school, without like artificially passing kids? You know, like, we can't do that because that's not accurate, but some way to make it where kids' scores aren't so low that it like disincentivizes them from working because they're just buried with an 8%, you know, and they kind of just check out. Um, how do we want to handle formative and summative work? So like right now we have like one grade, we're staying with one grade for now, and 90% of it's summative work, 10% of it, right, is the formative assessment scores. Do we want to make an adjustment there in either direction? And then final exams, which is like specific to high school, of course, but our finals count as 25% of the grade, which puts us pretty much, well, not pretty much, it puts us like on our own where no one else has finals that high, or really even that close. Like I think 15 is pretty much the highest that like anywhere else is, from like 5 to 15. So just wanting to hear from teachers, what do you think about that? What do you think, what's the purpose of your finals? What do you think the percentage should be? So giving everyone a chance to kind of weigh in on those things. And then just like transparently based on the voice at RHS, um, in initially looking at the data that's come in so far, we're kind of split, and it'll be interesting to see like where VHS is at in terms of like, you know, do we need to give kids zeros or not? You know, there's definitely still like voice and belief that like zeros are important because it basically like, I don't personally believe that, but like I guess the argument is kind of like it kind of like, you know, punitively incentivizes them to like engage in the work. Like I have not had that experience, but you know, people, there are people that feel that way, which is important, right? Like we have to like honor where everyone's at and everyone's voice and our decisions. Then other people are kind of on the other side of that spectrum, saying like, you know, I think we could raise the score as long as we're not artificially letting kids pass that shouldn't pass, or they pass without doing any work. Like that defeats the purpose of all this, right? And then the 90-10 issue, I'd say um, probably 80-20 would be the ratio that has the most kind of support from the feedback we got. And the rationale being it puts value on the formative work. It communicates to kids the formative work is important. Um, you can't like get an A in the class without doing formative work, which is different than like 90-10. So like it communicates a lot of things. And that was people's perception basically in the voice so far. So we'll see how it comes out of VHS. I'm sure it'll be similar, like different opinions and different, you know, ends of the spectrum on those topics. But then we'll be able to make some decisions about what we present to the board in terms of something that's consistent for kids, you know, from middle school up through high school. And middle school will still have differences compared to high school, of course, and elementary will still have differences compared to middle. But that's sort of the level of communication. And then member Sakura, who had to leave early tonight, but she's a member of the school board, obviously, so she's been updating the school board sort of on our talks and our progress all along. So that's kind of where we're at, just to keep you like involved, sort of how's your work being communicated out, and like where are we at in sort of like making decisions and like going public with that all the information. Any questions or about that, about what's being communicated or feedback or anything? What would be the plan for communicating with parents? Yeah, that's a good question. So like I think I would bring that back like this spring. I think that's a big part for this group. It's basically like I'd love to return that question for this whole group of stakeholders, and how do you communicate this to parents and actually get some parents feedback on that too, like what would be the best way to disseminate it. Um, I think it'll depend on what changes we make, but just like being clear, like the way I kind of see it, like theoretically, it's like what are we doing and why, and like, what are we not doing, so we can be clear. Like, you know, if we want to keep that message accurate, where people aren't like, oh, value is so ridiculous, we're getting rid of grades, you know, because anytime you make a change, like people kind of put their own perception on it. So like, my thing with that would be how can we be clear to people, you know, why we care. Like, oh, this is that book, making some change, you know, like this is not. And kids too, right? You know, such a kids in high school, building up their GPA and having effect. And the good news is the answer is probably not that much. Like when we looked at like 80/20 and like recalculated a lot of grades, the kids pretty much got the same exact grade, 90/10 and 80/20. Um, for the kids who are like performing at a higher place. Um, it definitely raised some kids' scores or in that bottom end, but it didn't really like pass kids with one passing. So it's kind of like why that's a nice kind of sweet spot. Like it does things for kids along different points in the spectrum without like having unintended consequences that we don't want. So artificial kids things, stuff like that. The interesting thing I'll say, I've said this to the steering committee before, like there's different like groups of opinions, but like it's a very fine distinction in like the grand scheme of this entire conversation. Like we've done away with a lot of like what traditional grading does that's not good for kids. Like our grades are far more standardized and like consistent. Like to us they're not, and we want to make them more consistent, but like in the grand scheme of things, compared to like a lot of other districts, like we are pretty far ahead. So like the differences people have over kind of like fine issues now versus like these macro level issues, you know, about like we all agree like what the purpose of a grade is, like for what a kid knows. Like in other districts, that is not universally agreed on. Like the purpose of a grade is a lot of different things, and I think like we're kind of past that type of conversation too. So that was kind of encouraging just to see like we're always going to have differences of opinions, but like as like a large unit district, like we have like a pretty common belief around like the fundamentals of assessment and grading and stuff like that. It's just the finer points we want to work on. Cool. Anything else? All right.
All right, thanks. So we're going to then finish up our book study. This is the last section of the book that we're reading. Of course, I always have to show my one of my favorite sayings from Maya Angelou. We've done the best we can knowing what we know. And now that we're learning more, we're going to build a system that allows us to do better. So looking at the book study, there we go. Oh, and that was just a reminder of our non-negotiables here. Um, for today, we're finishing this up, and these were the sections you were reading, and then we're going to discuss these now. So at your tables, oh, let me go back to the first page here. This is the QR code and the link to our folder. This is a folder called Participant Documents. Once you open Participant Documents, you'll see a folder called 2/24. That's where everything we need for tonight is. So somebody from your group should open up the note-taking document and then look at your table number and take your notes from your discussion in that row and put your notes from what you've identified in our discussion. So again, what we're looking at are these questions, and then just having those conversations. What resonated with you? What were some ahas? What were some key points that you think are important for our work? And we don't have to worry about that. I took out that key question for thought exchange right now because we have other thought exchange things happening. So we're just going to leave it at that. So what this time, instead of sharing out, having a conversation from that, what I'm going to do like a 5-minute warning, and then they'll give you an opportunity to review what other people said and then respond to that. Okay. So we're going to take about 20 minutes today, so go ahead and get started. Did not finish the reading in the book. It's okay. But if you do have an opportunity to finish that reading, it's a really, that section is really rather comfortable. A lot of really good information. If you have an opportunity to read it, I still think it would be beneficial for our work. So what we're going to look at next is is to look at making decisions, because we're getting really close to having to make a decision at this point in time. It takes a long time. I know there are a lot of folks, a lot of stakeholders who are wondering, why haven't we made a decision? And there are a lot of people in the room thinking, we should be making a decision. We're not ready to make a decision. But it takes time, but we're getting close. We've been at this for quite a while now. So what we want to do is take a look at the different types of grading systems we've been talking about. Adrienne and I were talking earlier, and she had brought up a phrase that Steve Earle was using in his presentation, and he talked about evidence-based grading. And so what I wanted to do is just share some information about that, because that's not necessarily a different type of grading system. It is kind of an encompassing term for these kinds of grading systems, because ultimately, and the definition is up here, it means providing students an accurate report of their current level of performance related to a standard or a competency. It's specific and meaningful feedback. So when we talk about evidence-based grading, it's still within the range of all of these things. But the thing I also want to point out is here we've got standards/competencies, but there is a difference between a standard and a competency. So I want you to read through this, and there's a PDF of this in the folder if you'd rather look at it on your own screen. But the standards are specific to what the students should be able to know and be able to do in relation to some established criteria, right? So it's statements, and they're what they call the building blocks for competencies. Competencies are how the standards are applied and how students transfer their learning. So I want you to think about the standards that are identified in your learning area versus things like portrait of a learner. Those are competencies. They're more application types of skills, or how we do our work skills. So when we talk about our evidence, we're talking about looking at either standards-based grading or proficiency-based grading based on standards or competencies, or potentially some combination of both, since we know that it's critical that we embed our portrait of a learner competencies within our work, right? So I just want to be clear on the difference between those. Make sense? Okay. Just in case those things come up. So the other thing we want to talk about, and this is based on, how many of you saw the video that Adam had shared with BHS, I believe it is? RHS. Okay, so not very many of you. Well, something that he said within that, and he shared earlier, was we're not going to a standards-based report card. So I want us to be clear around what that means with our work. Whoops, I went too, let me get back up here. So again, just to be clear, there is a difference between a report card, a transcript, and a grade book. And you can have a standards-based grade book, a competency-based grade book, a proficiency-based grade book that still translates into a report card with an A, B, C, D, or F. And I believe that's what you were referring to, correct, Adam? That's exactly what he was referring to. And the transcript, oh, by the way, the report card is a private document between the student, the parent, and the teachers. Only a few people have access to it, unless you actively share it with someone else. The transcript is the public document. So there are things that are allowed to be on a transcript and not allowed to be on a transcript, okay? So because that's the public document. So you can see there's a list of things that go on the transcript. It includes things like cumulative GPA, which you're not necessarily going to see on a report card unless you have a gradebook system that does that. It also includes scores from AP exams, SAT, other academic honors. So that's the difference between a transcript and the report card, okay? So I want us to be clear on that how we determine a grade is what we're talking about. So when we, again, look at this, what is our work? We are determining the best way to determine progress toward course learning outcomes. That's the grade book that will determine the grade on the report card. I will tell you the transcript. In some systems, grades are reported on the report card by standards, and that's where we talk about, they list the key standards for the content area and give a proficiency level on each of those standards. Or they're reported as overall summative lateral grades. So you might have 6 standards or competencies that are part of a unit or a subject. And ultimately, all of those are averaged or somehow weighted to determine the A, B, C, and F. That's where we're going to start. That's the work that we're doing. So, as we talk about that, I want you to look, there are two different links to articles here. One is called How Do Teachers Determine Letter Grades and GPAs from Standards-Based Grading. This is Matt Townsend. And then there's another one, rubrics are fine, but how do I get an A, right? Because that's always the question. So what I'm going to have you do is at your table, I want you to divide in half and, okay, come on. Half of you will read one article, half of you will read the other, and then you're going to jigsaw and have a conversation about it. There's a spot for you on our note-taking document for you to take notes on that. Okay? So I'm going to give you about 15 minutes. They're short articles, so they shouldn't take too long to read. And then you're going to have a discussion at your table. Questions? Okay. Authors, Tom Guskey and Matt Townsend, have done an enormous amount of study and research around grading. So I just wanted you to see these so you can see how it can happen. Thank you. It's okay. Thank you for the reminder. How it can happen that you can actually use a grade book in a specific system, but still identify an ultimate A, B, C, D, F, if that's what your goal is to do. So just some ideas there. So if you look at both of those pages, there are an enormous amount of articles, research, blog posts, books around the topic. So the other night I spent a lot of time reading through a lot of Tom Guskey's articles, forgetting how late it was, because that's what I read for fun, I guess. But it's really interesting stuff that he's done. So now we're going to move on. This is rubber hit the road time. So I want you all to just pause for a minute. Imagine yourself in a future where you are going to make a decision. And you are going to make a decision around what system of grading you support. Think about whether it's going to be standards-based grading, proficiency-based grading, mastery-based grading. And imagine you had to make a decision tonight. So what I want you to do is click on these tiny words that say this poll. Notice underneath it says this is not our final decision. This is not. That will happen next month. That will happen next month. So click that poll and submit your vote. Should I do the Jeopardy final answer thing?
On my account right now.
It's in the agenda too, yeah.
Oh.
This is what the poll looks like. You should be able to access it. There's one question where you are voting for one of those three. Note that it is a mandatory question, and there is no other option. And then the next question is, what is your rationale for making this decision? It's hard. It's hard.
I feel like we're there yet.
We aren't.
Oh, okay. So when you said we're gonna decide this by next time, what does that mean?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what we don't know in order to make that decision tonight, and then we're going to get that information and be ready. We'll share what that looks like, but we're close. We're gonna make a decision soon. Tonight isn't the night to make it, but it's gonna force us to really think about this between now and next time and make a decision. Yeah. And I'll share some additional resources so that if you don't feel ready to make that decision, and there are a number of people that aren't feeling ready, but to give you some resources to help you have the information that might help you make that decision. Because we spend enough time talking about these things that we're pretty close. You answer what you think. Wow, nobody wants to do this. They don't want to make a decision. We have 19 people in the room and 3 people have submitted their choice. Got about 30 seconds to make a decision. You also have to put in your rationale. 4. I'm not going to show the chart yet because I don't want people to be swayed by what other people are voting for. 5. 6. Me too. 'Still at 6. We're at 7. 8. 9. We're halfway there. 12. We're getting closer. I got 6 more people who need to submit something. I didn't count you. That's okay. You can do it after, but 13, 14. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Adam, are you voting?
I voted.
You voted. Okay, so that's 19 we need. I wasn't sure if I should count or not. Oh, okay. Now we're back to 18. Feel free to vote if you want to, though. Okay. 15. 16. Feeling stressed. I see it on your faces. We're not making a decision right now. Don't worry. This is not a stressful, well, it is a little, but No commitment right now. 16. Those of you that have not decided, we need you to finish up. I know you're probably working on rationale, and that's okay. You have access to them. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I might not have done it. Now that I'll get it to you. 0.7% read proficiency based. We have 27.8% standards based. And let me get my cursor over here so we can see that number. We have 1 at mastery based. Okay? Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. This is just your opinion at this point in time. So now what we're going to do, let me come back to this one. Now you're going to move to a table, and I will get that in a minute. You're going to move to a table with people who selected the same option as you. And then what you're going to do is discuss what is in place to support your preferred system, what still needs to be done to support your preferred system. We have a spot on our note-taking chart for that to happen. So I'm going to come back to this document here. So when we look at, numbers, we have 12 who are saying proficiency. So if you voted proficiency based, I want you at table 5 and table, is that 2? 5 and 2, okay? If you voted for mastery, sit with Adrienne. And if you voted, and that's okay, that's a great system too. And if you voted for standards based, okay, we'll be at that table where the 3 people are raising their hands. Our middle school contingency, okay? Standards, mastery, proficiency and standards, okay? So now you've got a different table number. Make sure you're taking your notes on the correct table number. Are you joining? Okay. Okay, I just want to, if you want to join and just listen to the conversation, feel free.